You have never visited the past. Not once. Every memory you carry, every childhood moment you swear happened, every yesterday you feel so sure about exists, only as a pattern firing in your brain right now. The strange part is not that memory can be wrong. The strange part is that it might be the only version of the past that has ever existed. You assume time leaves footprints behind it. You imagine events stacking neatly, one after another, forming a solid road you have already walked. But what if there is no road? What if there is only this moment, constantly building the illusion of a trail behind you? Tonight, we explore a theory that quietly dissolves history itself. A theory that suggests the past is not something you came from, but something your mind is creating in the present. And if that is true, then who you are may not be the result of what happened, but the result of what your brain is inventing now. You are certain some memories are ancient. Not historically ancient, but personally ancient. Your first day at school, the smell of a grandparent's house, a childhood bedroom that no longer exists. These memories feel old in a way that seems deeper than imagination. They carry a texture of distance, a faded emotional tone, like photographs left too long in the sun. But the unsettling truth is this: the feeling of age inside a memory is something your brain generates in the present. That sense of long ago is not stamped onto the memory from the past. It is produced now, the same way your mind produces color, sound, and depth from electrical signals. When you remember being 6 years old, you are not reaching backward through time. You are constructing an experience in this moment, and tagging it with a sensation called pastness. Neuroscience has shown that memory is not playback. It is reconstruction. Each time you recall an event, your brain reassembles it from scattered pieces, sensory fragments, emotional tones, learned facts, personal beliefs. You are not opening a file. You are rebuilding a scene using whatever materials are available. And here is where things begin to tilt. During this reconstruction, the brain also assigns a temporal label. It decides how long ago this event feels. That decision is based less on a reliable internal clock and more on contextual clues. How different you believe you were then. How many life changes seem to sit between that memory and now. How emotionally distant the event feels. In other words, the age of a memory is a judgment, not a measurement. You can test this in subtle ways. Think about a recent conversation you had last week. It probably feels close, still warm, easy to access. Now think about a random moment from 5 years ago that carried little emotional weight. That older memory might feel strangely flat and abstract, almost dreamlike, despite being far more recent than some vivid childhood moment. Your brain is not sorting memories by actual time past. It is sorting them by narrative distance, by how different that version of you seems compared to the one thinking right now. This means a memory can feel ancient even if the version of it you are recalling was largely constructed yesterday. Because every act of remembering changes the memory itself. When you bring up a childhood moment, you are not retrieving the original experience. You are retrieving the last version you constructed. And the last version may already contain distortions, additions, and emotional edits layered on top of older edits. Like a story retold so many times that no one remembers the first telling. Yet it still feels old. Deeply old. Authentically old. That feeling is the trick. Your brain uses the sensation of age to stabilize your identity. If certain memories feel distant and anchored in a fixed past, then you feel like a continuous person moving forward through time. The illusion of a long personal history helps create the illusion of a stable self. But if the oldness of a memory is being generated now, then the timeline of your life is not a fixed structure behind you. It is a model your brain updates in the present to maintain coherence. You are not standing at the end of a long hallway called your past. You are standing in a room, painting a hallway onto the wall behind you, then convincing yourself you walked through it. And because the painting is detailed, emotional, and familiar, you never question whether the hallway was ever really there in the way you imagine. The past, in this sense, is not a place you came from. It is a feeling your brain produces to explain why you seem to be here. A feeling that can be stretched, compressed, softened, or sharpened without you noticing the edits. Which means the oldest parts of your life may not be the most solid. They may simply be the stories your mind has practiced telling the longest. You wake up believing yesterday is finished. Filed away, locked, untouchable. But your brain does not treat the past like a sealed archive. It treats it like a draft that is still open on the desk. Every time you remember something that happened yesterday, you are not opening a recording. You are reopening a construction site. The walls are still soft, the paint is still wet, and without asking permission, your mind quietly renovates. This is not a flaw in your design. It is part of how memory works. When an experience first happens, your brain does not store it as a perfect video. It stores fragments, bits of visual information, emotional reactions, sounds, interpretations, your understanding of what the event meant at the time. These pieces are distributed across different regions of the brain, like scattered pages of a book. Later, when you remember yesterday, your brain gathers those pieces and assembles them into a coherent scene. But the brain also mixes in your current mood, your present beliefs, and everything you have learned since then. So the memory of yesterday is built using parts of today. If you felt embarrassed during a conversation, but later decided it went fine, your next memory of that conversation may feel calmer than it actually was. If you argued with someone and are still angry, your memory may exaggerate their tone, sharpen their words, and blur any kindness they showed. The emotional editor is always on duty. Neuroscientists call this process reconsolidation. When you recall a memory, it briefly becomes unstable, flexible, open to change, and when it is stored again, it can include new information that was not there before. You do not notice this happening because the update feels seamless. Your brain writes over the previous version and presents the edited scene as if it were the original. Imagine rewriting a paragraph in a document, saving it, and then forgetting you ever changed it. The new version simply becomes what was always there. That is what your mind does with yesterday. This constant editing serves a purpose. Your brain is not trying to preserve history. It is trying to maintain a useful story that helps you function now. If remembering an event in a slightly different way helps you feel safer, more confident, or more consistent with your current identity, your memory will gently lean in that direction. Accuracy is often sacrificed for coherence. Suppose you see yourself as a patient person. When you recall a moment yesterday where you snapped at someone, your brain may soften the edges. You were tired. They were being unreasonable. It was not really like you. The memory shifts just enough to protect the larger story of who you believe you are. Over time, these micro-edits accumulate. Yesterday slowly drifts, not wildly, not obviously, but subtly, like a coastline reshaped by tiny waves you never notice. This is why two people can experience the same event and later remember it differently. Each brain edits the shared moment to fit its own emotional landscape and personal narrative. There is no neutral recording to return to, only living memories that keep adapting. Even the order of events can change. Your brain is more concerned with cause and meaning than with strict sequence. If it makes more sense in your personal story that one thing led to another, your memory may rearrange the timeline to fit that logic. The result is unsettling. The version of yesterday you carry today is not identical to the version you held last night, and tomorrow, it will change again. Yet you feel certain, completely certain. The confidence you have in your memory is not a measure of accuracy. It is a measure of how smoothly the story fits together. Your brain gives you the feeling of certainty to keep you from constantly doubting your own past. Too much doubt would make decision-making nearly impossible. So the system favors a stable narrative over a perfectly preserved one. You walk around believing you came from a fixed chain of events, when in reality you are traveling with a self-updating autobiography. This means the past is not only being remembered in the present, it is being rewritten in the present. Yesterday is not sitting behind you unchanged. It is being rebuilt every time you glance back. Small details shift, emotional colors adjust, meanings evolve, and you never receive a notification that the file has been edited. You simply feel like the same person who had the same day, but the day you remember is already different from the day you lived. And if even yesterday is still in motion, still open to revision, then the idea of a solid, finished past begins to thin out. It starts to look less like a place you left behind, and more like a story your brain keeps polishing so the present makes sense. A story that feels stable, only because the edits happen quietly, in the background, while you are busy being here. You feel like someone who has been moving steadily through time. A child became a teenager. A teenager became the person sitting here now. Your life appears as a smooth line stretching backward, a continuous thread of experiences stitched together into a single story called me. But that smoothness is not something you directly experience. It is something your brain manufactures. At any given moment, you are not aware of your entire life. You are aware of a tiny slice of the present, along with a handful of memories your mind chooses to activate. The sense that all the years in between are connected is not constantly perceived, it is inferred. Your brain acts like a novelist who writes only the current chapter in detail, then summarizes the earlier ones whenever needed to keep the plot coherent. Continuity is a narrative effect. If you look closely, your past is full of gaps. Entire days, weeks, even years have vanished from conscious access. You do not remember most breakfasts you have eaten, most walks you have taken, most ordinary conversations you have had, yet you still feel like you lived through an unbroken stream of time. That feeling does not come from stored experience. It comes from a model. Your brain maintains a simplified outline of your personal history, major events, key relationships, turning points, emotional landmarks. These highlights are linked together into a storyline that gives the impression of continuity, even though the vast majority of lived moments are missing. It is like seeing only a few dots on a page and automatically perceiving a line connecting them. This line is your personal history, but the line is imagined. Even your sense of being the same person across time is a construction. The person you were at age 7 had different beliefs, different fears, different priorities, even a different brain structure. Cells have died and been replaced. Neural pathways have strengthened, weakened, or disappeared. Yet you feel like that child was you in the same way you are, you now. What links these versions together is not an unbroken chain of memory. It is a story of identity your brain keeps updating. Each time you think about your past, you reinterpret earlier versions of yourself from your current perspective. You assign motives you did not understand then. You frame events as steps that led to who you are now. Your present self reaches backward and edits the meaning of previous selves to make the journey feel logical. You are always becoming this person, you tell yourself. But that is hindsight painting a path that was never visible while you walked it. At the time, your life did not feel like a clear narrative arc. It felt like a series of confusing presents, each one uncertain and incomplete. Only later does your brain compress those scattered moments into a storyline with direction and purpose. The illusion of continuity depends on selective memory and constant reinterpretation. If you lost large portions of your autobiographical memory, as happens in certain forms of amnesia, the sense of a continuous self can weaken or fracture. People may feel disconnected from their earlier lives, as if those experiences happened to someone else. This shows that personal history is not a solid entity stored intact. It is an active construction that requires ongoing mental work. Your brain is constantly stitching together past, present, and imagined future into a coherent tapestry, but the stitches are being sewn now. Right now you are creating the impression that you have always been moving toward this moment. Without that construction, experience would feel more like a series of disconnected scenes than a single unfolding life. The continuity you rely on is a stabilizing illusion, a cognitive glue that binds separate moments into something that feels like a journey. This has a strange consequence. If the sense of a continuous past is being generated in the present, then your life story is not a fixed road stretching behind you. It is more like a map your brain redraws each day, adjusting the routes so they all seem to lead naturally to where you currently stand. The past does not hand you an identity. The present assembles one by arranging selected memories into a convincing sequence. You are not so much the product of a continuous history as the author of a continuity your brain keeps inventing to make existence feel stable. And because the story updates quietly and consistently, you never notice the edits. You simply wake up each day feeling like the latest chapter in a book that was always leading here. Even if the earlier chapters were never as solid or as connected as they now appear, you believe cause flows in one direction. Something happens. Then you remember it. The event sits back there, fixed and untouchable, while your memory simply reports on it. That seems obvious. Almost too obvious to question. But your brain does something stranger. It uses the present to reshape the meaning and even the details of what you think already happened. The past is not just remembered from here, it is interpreted from here, and interpretation is never neutral. Imagine you meet someone for the first time. The conversation is ordinary. Nothing stands out. You go home and forget about it. A week later, you learn that this person will become very important in your life. Suddenly your memory of that first meeting changes. You remember subtle sparks, meaningful glances, a sense that something felt different. Those elements feel discovered, but they are often constructed after the fact. Your present knowledge reaches backward and paints significance onto a moment that originally felt plain. This is called retrospective meaning-making. The present does not only observe the past, it assigns it purpose. Your brain is constantly trying to make your life feel coherent, as if events unfolded in a meaningful sequence rather than a chaotic stream. To do this, it reshapes earlier memories so they appear to lead naturally to where you are now. If you are happy with your current life, your past may start to look like a series of necessary steps that brought you here. Struggles become lessons, mistakes become turning points, random encounters become meant to be. But if you are unhappy, the same past can be repainted as a chain of regrets, missed chances, and warning signs you should have seen. The events themselves may not have changed, but the story surrounding them has. The present acts like a narrator revising earlier chapters to match the tone of the current one. Emotion plays a powerful role in this rewriting. Your current mood can shift the emotional color of old memories. When you feel lonely, past social moments may seem more distant or awkward than they felt at the time. When you feel confident, the same memories may appear warmer, smoother, more successful. You are not just remembering what happened, you are remembering what it means now. Even factual details are not immune. Studies show that when people learn new information about an event, they often fold that information into their memory of the original experience. Later, they cannot tell which parts they directly witnessed and which parts they learned afterward. The memory feels unified, seamless, authentic. But it is a blend of past perception and present knowledge. Your brain does this because raw experience is messy and ambiguous. At the time things happen, you rarely know their full significance. Only later, from a new vantage point, can you place them into a larger pattern. So your mind quietly updates the past to reflect the understanding you have now. It is less like watching history, and more like continuously editing a documentary where the ending keeps changing. This also affects how you see your own decisions. Once you know the outcome of a choice, your brain tends to believe you knew it all along. This hindsight bias makes the past feel more predictable and orderly than it actually was. Uncertainty gets erased. Alternative possibilities fade. You remember events as if they were always leading to this exact result, even though, at the time, many futures were still open. The present compresses those lost possibilities into a single, tidy storyline. So what you call the past is not just a record of what occurred, it is a dynamic model shaped by who you are right now. Your current beliefs, emotions, relationships, and self-image all reach backward and rearrange how earlier moments appear. The strange result is this. The past you think you are remembering did not exist in that exact form when it happened. It exists as a collaboration between then and now. This means history, at least on the personal level, is not something you carry unchanged. It is something you continuously rewrite to make sense of the person you currently believe yourself to be. You are not standing at the end of a fixed chain of causes. You are standing in the present, looking backward, and drawing lines that make the chaos look like a path. And once those lines are drawn, they feel so natural, so obvious, that you forget you were the one who drew them. You trust that you experience the world as it happens. Light hits your eyes, sound reaches your ears, sensations rise in your body, and you assume awareness is right there with them, like a spotlight that turns on the instant reality appears. It feels immediate, seamless, live, but awareness runs slightly behind the world, like a broadcast with a hidden delay. Neuroscience suggests that what you experience as the present is actually a carefully assembled reconstruction of events that have already occurred. Your brain needs time, fractions of a second, to gather sensory input, process it, compare it with past patterns, and build a coherent scene. Only after this work is done, do you become consciously aware of what just happened. By the time you see something, your brain has already interpreted it. By the time you decide to move, unconscious brain activity preparing that movement has already begun. Experiments measuring brain signals show that neural activity predicting a decision can appear before a person reports the conscious intention to act. In other words, your brain starts the process, and your awareness joins slightly later, feeling as though it was there all along. Awareness is not the starting point. It is the narrator arriving just after the action begins. This creates a strange situation. What you call now is not the razor-thin edge of reality. It is a stitched-together moment representing the recent past, polished and delivered to consciousness, as if it were live. Your mind backdates awareness. It presents you with a finished experience, and labels it as happening in real time, even though it took time to construct. The delay is small enough that you never notice the gap. The illusion of immediacy remains intact. But this delay has consequences for how you understand the past. If awareness always arrives slightly after events have already unfolded in the brain and body, then what you think of as your direct experience of reality is already a memory by the time you notice it. The present you feel is already the past in physical terms. This blurs the boundary you imagine between present and past. The moment you become aware of something, it has already happened at the neural level. Your experience is a story your brain tells about events that just occurred, and like any story, it is shaped, filtered, and organized before being presented. You never experience raw reality. You experience a constructed account delivered with a tiny delay and stamped now. This also affects your sense of agency. You feel like the conscious author of your actions, but much of the preparation for those actions happens before awareness steps in. Your brain sets things in motion, and awareness interprets them as my decision. The story of what just happened is written slightly after the fact, then placed into your stream of consciousness, as if it were unfolding in sync with reality. If even the present is a reconstructed account of events that have already passed, then your experience of time is layered with interpretation from the very beginning. You are not standing on a clean dividing line between past and present. You are always inhabiting a processed version of what just was. The present moment is already memory in disguise, and if your awareness of now is already a reconstruction, then the idea of a solid, directly experienced past becomes even more fragile. You never had access to events in their pure form to begin with. You only ever had access to your brain's interpretation of them, delivered after a delay. So when you think you are remembering the past, you are remembering earlier interpretations of earlier interpretations, each one constructed after the fact and labeled as reality. Experience does not flow cleanly into memory. It is memory, almost from the start. You are living in a continuous echo, where awareness trails behind the physical world, gathering what just happened and presenting it as the present. By the time you know anything, it has already slipped into what was, and yet it feels immediate, direct, undeniable. The delay is hidden so well that you build your entire sense of reality on top of it, never realizing that the now you trust has already become part of the past. Your brain is busy inventing. You can be wrong about many things and know it. You can doubt your math, second-guess your decisions, question your future, but when it comes to certain memories, you feel unshakably sure. You remember a conversation, an argument, a moment of embarrassment, and the certainty sits heavy and solid in your chest. This happened. I know it did. That sense of knowing feels like proof. But certainty is not evidence. It is an emotion. Your brain generates the feeling of certainty the same way it generates fear, nostalgia, or excitement. It is a signal about how confident your internal systems are in a particular story. It does not guarantee the story is accurate. In fact, research into memory shows that confidence and accuracy are often only loosely connected. People can be extremely confident in memories that are partially distorted or entirely false. Others can doubt memories that are largely correct. The strength of belief does not reliably track the truth of the event. So where does certainty come from? When your brain reconstructs a memory, it evaluates how smoothly the pieces fit together. Are there contradictions, gaps, emotional conflicts? If the scene assembles into a coherent narrative that aligns with your current beliefs and identity, your brain adds a tag of familiarity and fluency. That mental fluency feels like truth. A memory that comes easily, with clear imagery and a strong emotional tone, will often feel more certain than one that is vague or fragmented. But vividness can be manufactured. Repetition, imagination, and suggestion can all make a memory feel more detailed and therefore more convincing, even if its accuracy has drifted. Each time you recall an event, you strengthen the neural pathways associated with that version of the story. The memory becomes easier to access, more polished, more stable in its current form. That ease of retrieval feeds the sensation that it must be real. Your brain mistakes familiarity for accuracy. Social reinforcement also plays a role. If other people confirm your version of events, your certainty increases. If they challenge it, your certainty may drop, or your memory may shift to better align with the group. Memory is not just a personal record, it is a socially negotiated narrative. But the feeling of certainty arrives before any careful analysis. It is fast, automatic, and persuasive. This is useful. If you had to critically evaluate every memory before acting, daily life would slow to a crawl. The brain uses the emotion of certainty as a shortcut, allowing you to rely on your internal model of the past without constant hesitation. The problem is that the shortcut can mislead you. You may feel absolutely sure that someone said something in a certain tone, when in reality your current feelings toward them have colored the memory. You may feel certain you always wanted the path you are now on, when that certainty was constructed after the outcome became clear. The mind prefers a confident story to an uncertain one, even if the confident story is less accurate. Certainty also protects your sense of self. If your memories felt unstable or doubtful all the time, your identity would feel fragile. So the brain reinforces key memories with strong feelings of conviction, making your personal history feel solid and dependable. But that solidity is emotional, not historical. Think of certainty as a stamp your brain places on a memory, after evaluating how well it fits your current internal world. The stamp says, "This makes sense, this aligns, this is safe to rely on." It does not say, "This is a perfect recording of reality." The unsettling implication is that your strongest convictions about the past may tell you more about who you are now than about what actually happened then. The feeling of certainty is generated in the present, based on present coherence. So when you say, "I know this happened," what you often mean is, "This memory fits smoothly into the story my brain is currently telling." That story can change, and when it does, the emotional tone of certainty can shift with it, quietly reattaching itself to a slightly revised version of events. You walk through life carrying not just memories, but emotional seals of approval attached to them. Those seals feel like evidence carved in stone, but they are closer to weather patterns in the mind, forming and reforming around the stories that best hold your present world together. It feels like your mind has a storage room, shelves lined with moments, labeled boxes, open one, and out comes a birthday party, a conversation, a quiet afternoon from years ago. The metaphor is comforting. It suggests the past is sitting somewhere intact, waiting to be accessed. But your brain does not store memories like files in an archive. It stores ingredients. When something happens, your brain breaks the experience apart. Visual details are processed in one area, sounds in another, emotional responses in yet another. Your interpretation of what the event meant is woven through networks tied to beliefs, expectations, and prior knowledge. There is no single place where the memory lives. Later, when you remember, your brain does not retrieve a complete package. It reactivates fragments across these different systems and assembles them into a scene. This assembly happens in the present, influenced by your current state, your current knowledge, and the questions you are asking. Remembering is more like cooking than replaying. You start with ingredients, not a finished dish, and each time you cook, the result can vary slightly. A little more emphasis on one detail, a little less on another. A new emotional flavor blended in from how you feel today. Because reconstruction is guided by present context, memory is flexible. If you are asked to recall an event in a different way, focusing on different aspects, your brain may emphasize new elements and downplay others. Over time, these shifts can accumulate, and the reconstructed version becomes your new reference point. You forget that earlier versions ever existed. This explains why memory is so sensitive to suggestion. If someone asks, "Do you remember the loud crash?" instead of "Do you remember a sound?" your brain may incorporate the idea of a crash into the reconstruction. Even if the original sound was softer, the suggestion becomes part of the ingredients used to rebuild the scene. Once included, it can feel indistinguishable from what you actually perceived. Your mind is not trying to deceive you. Reconstruction is efficient. It allows memories to stay relevant. Instead of storing vast amounts of precise detail, the brain keeps a flexible framework that can be updated as needed. This saves energy and helps you use the past to navigate the present. But it also means there is no untouched original to go back to. Even the first time you remember something after it happens, you are already reconstructing. And once reconstructed, the memory is stored again in its new form. The next recall builds on that version, not on the initial experience. Over time, the distance between the original event and your current memory of it can grow, even though the memory feels stable and familiar. Imagine photocopying a photograph, then photocopying the copy, again and again. Each generation looks similar, but small distortions creep in. Dust specks become marks, edges blur, contrast shifts. Eventually the image still represents the original scene, but it is no longer a direct trace of it. Your memories are generational copies created through repeated acts of reconstruction. This also means memory is deeply tied to imagination. When you imagine a past event, you activate many of the same brain systems involved in remembering. The line between recalling and imagining is thinner than it feels. Both involve building a scene in the present using stored pieces. The difference is not in the basic process, but in how strongly the brain tags the scene as something that really happened. yet that tag itself can be influenced. Repeated imagination of an event can make it feel more familiar, more vivid, and eventually more real. The brain can mistake the fluency of construction for evidence of authenticity. So when you think of your past, you are not peering through a window into another time. You are standing in the present, assembling a model that represents what you believe happened, using whatever fragments and interpretations are currently available. The past you experience is a simulation built now. It can be useful, meaningful, emotionally powerful, but it is not a preserved slice of reality waiting on a shelf. It is a living construction project that your brain runs each time you look backward. And because the reconstruction happens so quickly and smoothly, you never see the scaffolding. You only see the finished scene and assume it has been sitting there unchanged all along. Your brain dislikes loose ends. Randomness, gaps, and unresolved fragments create a kind of cognitive itch, so the mind does what it does best. It weaves. Out of scattered moments, partial memories, and emotional impressions, it spins a story. Not because the story is perfectly true, but because a story is easier to live inside than chaos. From childhood onward, your experiences arrive as disconnected bursts of sensation and feeling. A loud sound here, a confusing argument there, a moment of joy with no clear reason. At the time, you rarely understand what anything means. Life is a stream of unfinished pieces. But later, your brain revisits these fragments and begins stitching them together into a narrative about how things were and how you became who you are. This narrative feels discovered. In reality, it is constructed. Humans are natural storytellers, not just socially, but neurologically. The brain constantly searches for cause and effect. If A happened, and then B happened, it assumes A must have influenced B. If a certain event preceded a major change in your life, your mind links them into a meaningful sequence. The story creates a sense of direction, where there may have been only coincidence. For example, you might look back and decide that one childhood moment shaped your personality. A teacher's comment made you shy. A small success made you confident. But at the time, that moment was just one of thousands. Its importance is often assigned later, when your present self searches for origins that make sense. Your brain prefers a clean narrative arc over a messy accumulation of influences. This need for narrative coherence helps you predict the future and explain your behavior. If you believe you became cautious because of certain past events, you feel like your current habits have understandable roots. Your life becomes a story with continuity, not a series of disconnected reactions. But the cost of this coherence is simplification. Real life is shaped by countless tiny factors, many of which you never notice. Yet your brain compresses this complexity into a handful of defining chapters. The result is a life story that feels meaningful and structured, but is far tidier than reality ever was. You remember turning points more clearly than long stretches of ordinary time. You highlight dramatic shifts and overlook gradual changes. This selective emphasis makes your past feel like a sequence of pivotal scenes rather than a slow, continuous drift. The brain edits for narrative impact. Even your sense of personality is tied to this storytelling process. You believe you have consistent traits because your brain links different behaviors across time into a unified character. But in reality, your responses shift depending on context, mood, and environment. The stable self is partly a narrative convenience. It is easier to believe you are one continuous character than a collection of shifting patterns. This storytelling instinct is so strong that the brain will fill gaps rather than admit uncertainty. If you cannot remember why you made a decision, your mind often invents a reason that fits your self-image. That invented explanation can feel just as real as a genuine memory. You do not experience the invention as fiction. You experience it as insight. Over time, these constructed explanations accumulate into a personal mythology. You have always been this kind of person. Your life has always been heading in this direction. Events happened for reasons that make sense in hindsight. The story feels solid, inevitable. But it is a model built in the present to make your inner world feel stable and understandable. The original experiences were not arranged as a clear narrative when they occurred. They were raw, confusing, and open-ended. Only later does your brain tighten the plot. So the past you carry is not just a collection of memories. It is a story your brain keeps refining, smoothing contradictions, filling holes, and linking scenes into a meaningful arc. You live inside that story so completely that you mistake it for history itself. Yet the story was never actually there in the way you now imagine. It did not unfold with clear chapters and themes. It was assembled afterward, from fragments, by a brain that cannot tolerate the idea that life might be more random, more fragmented, and less narratively satisfying than the tale it tells. Memory feels reliable. It feels like a vault where the past sits preserved, waiting for you to access it. You can almost touch it, almost see it, almost hear it as if it is happening again. That feeling is powerful. It can convince you of things you are utterly certain about. But certainty is no proof. Your memories are fragile, malleable, and sometimes entirely false. False memories are not rare mistakes. They are a natural byproduct of how your brain reconstructs experience. Every time you recall an event, you rebuild it from fragments, bits of sight, sound, emotion, and interpretation. Each reconstruction is influenced by your current mood, your present knowledge, your assumptions, and even subtle suggestions from others. Over time, these edits accumulate. The memory you experience today may barely resemble the original event, yet it feels as vivid and authentic as ever. Experiments in psychology reveal this unsettling truth. In laboratory settings, researchers can implant entire events in people's memories that never happened. Participants come to remember details, conversations, and emotions from these fabricated scenarios, with confidence indistinguishable from their real memories. People even argue about details of events that never occurred. The brain doesn't store truth. It stores coherence. It wants the memory to make sense more than it wants it to be accurate. The fragility of recall extends to time itself. When you remember the sequence of events, your brain sometimes reorders them to fit a narrative or causal logic. Minor details shift. People say different things in memory than they actually did. Locations morph, emotions exaggerate or diminish. Yet the overall scene feels seamless, as if it had been stored perfectly. This seamlessness is the brain's illusion of stability. It fools you into believing that your past is concrete. Memory is also social. Conversations about the past, photographs, social media, and storytelling all influence how events are recalled. Each reminder, each discussion, each photograph acts like a brushstroke on the canvas of memory. The picture may become more beautiful, more dramatic, or more coherent, but it drifts further from the original scene. Collective reinforcement can even create shared false memories among groups, where multiple people remember the same event that never happened. Even everyday recall illustrates fragility. You might remember details differently in the morning than in the evening. Stress, fatigue, and distractions subtly reshape what you believe you experienced. Minor errors compound. A friend's phrase remembered slightly wrong becomes solid fact. The background of a scene shifts in your mind. A fleeting sensation becomes a vivid anchored detail. The emotional tone of memory is especially vulnerable. Your feelings at the time of recall infuse the event, coloring it as if the color always existed. Fear, anger, joy, or nostalgia can amplify, flatten, or even invent sensations. Over time, repeated recollections create a memory that exists more as a feeling than as an accurate record. Even autobiographical memory, the story of you, is subject to this fragility. The past you recall is a narrative constructed for coherence. Gaps are filled, events rearranged, and personal significance imposed after the fact. Who you were in childhood may be a reconstruction heavily informed by who you are now. The child you remember is less a person who existed in time than a reflection of your present mind interpreting fragments. The fragility of recall forces a disorienting conclusion. The past is not a fixed repository. What you think happened is continuously rewritten, edited, and revised. Memory is alive, not static. It is a process, not a product. Your brain prioritizes usability, narrative coherence, and emotional resonance over literal accuracy. This means that certainty about your past, the vividness of your memories, and even shared recollections with others are never guarantees of what actually occurred. They are signals your brain constructs to help you navigate the present. Reality becomes a blend of fragments, interpretations, and reconstructions, and the mind convinces you it is the truth. You carry a life built on fragile scaffolding, yet the scaffolding feels solid. False memories, distortions, and imaginative reconstructions all weave together seamlessly. You live inside this tapestry, unaware that much of what feels permanent has always been a fragile illusion. The past, it turns out, is not a place you traveled. It is a space your brain keeps building, revising, and embellishing, while insisting it has always been real. Every memory you recall carries an emotional signature. You remember not only what happened, but also how it felt. The laughter, the shame, the fear, the warmth, they are inseparable from the images and sounds in your mind. But here's the disorienting truth. The emotions you feel when remembering yesterday are not just echoes, they are active forces shaping the memory itself, manufacturing a version of the past that may never have existed exactly that way. Your brain does not store events in a vacuum. It encodes experiences along with their emotional intensity, but when you reconstruct the memory, your current emotional state interacts with the past. Happiness can brighten a dull memory, sadness can darken a neutral one, and anxiety can warp even pleasant recollections into tense, threatening scenes. The memory feels like a faithful record, yet it has been subtly repainted to match your present feelings. Consider a childhood birthday. The room may have been noisy, chaotic, and slightly stressful, but when recalling it years later while feeling nostalgia, your brain emphasizes joy, warmth, and wonder, minimizing discomfort or confusion. You experience the past as a harmonious scene, but it is a version manufactured to resonate with your current emotional state. Even minor emotional fluctuations influence recall. Feeling anxious can make a casual argument with a friend seem more intense. Feeling confident can make a failure appear smaller, almost like a lesson you were always ready to learn. Your brain is editing emotional tones in real time, constructing a past that aligns with how you feel now. This process also explains why two people can recall the same event so differently. One might feel hurt, highlighting slights and neglect. Another might feel amused, emphasizing humor and warmth. The event itself did not change, but the version each person remembers is created anew in the present, filtered through emotion. Memory and emotion are inseparable in this sense. Emotion is not a passive tag attached to recall, it is an active ingredient, shaping which details are highlighted, which fade, and which are even invented. Strong emotions make some aspects of a memory more vivid, while less charged details disappear entirely. Even the passage of time alters emotional influence. Memories recalled long after the event are more malleable, more subject to reconstruction based on current emotional needs. Your brain may embellish the importance of certain moments, or amplify sensations to make the story of your past emotionally coherent. Memory is therefore not a fixed record of what happened yesterday. It is a living narrative, constantly revised under the influence of emotion. The laughter you remember, the fear you feel, the warmth of a scene, all of it is a creation of your present mind, projected backward into the version of yesterday you carry with you. The past, through this lens, is not something that happened independently of you. It is a personal artifact, manufactured each time you recall it, shaped more by how you feel now than by what actually occurred then. Emotion acts as a sculptor, molding fragments of sensory experience into a cohesive, believable scene. The result is a memory that feels authentic, certain, and immutably true, even if the version you hold is partly or largely an invention. Your sense of what happened is therefore inseparable from your sense of how it felt. And because emotions shift continuously, the version of yesterday you remember is never final, never fixed, and never entirely accurate. It is a living construction, forged in the crucible of the present. The unsettling conclusion is this: you do not simply recall yesterday, you manufacture it. Each memory is a creative act, where the past is rewritten to align with the emotional narrative your brain needs to maintain coherence, identity, and continuity. In other words, the past you remember is as much a reflection of your present as it is a record of what occurred. And if emotion can reshape yesterday so thoroughly, what else you think you know about the past may also be a construction, waiting to be rewritten the next time you remember. You think of the past as fixed. Events happened. You remember them. They are behind you, immutable and definite. But consider a strange possibility. The past you experience is less a record of what occurred, and more a prediction your brain constructs after the fact. Memory is not passive. When you recall something, your brain pieces together fragments from perception, emotion, and context. It then organizes them into a coherent story. But the mind does not just reconstruct. It anticipates. It asks, given who I am now, what must have happened? The reconstruction is already a prediction, shaped to fit the narrative and expectations of the present self. This explains why hindsight feels so natural. Once an outcome is known, events leading up to it appear inevitable. Your brain retrofits details to make the path look logical. You might remember, thinking you always suspected a result, even if at the time the outcome was unpredictable. Memory is predicting the past, filling gaps to make your life story consistent with what you now know. Every recalled event becomes an inference. You combine sensory traces with assumptions, beliefs, and knowledge acquired later. If a conversation left ambiguous emotions, Your brain might predict what was probably said or intended, then incorporate that prediction into the memory. You experience it as certainty, even though it was constructed after the fact. The predictive nature of memory also explains collective false memories. Shared assumptions and societal narratives influence individuals' reconstructions. Groups can converge on what happened, even if events unfolded differently, because everyone's brain is predicting the past in ways that maintain social coherence. Even mundane recollections are predictions. When recalling a morning routine, you reconstruct details in line with what usually occurs. Your brain fills in gaps, predicting objects, movements, and timings. The memory feels precise, but it is largely guided by probability and pattern, not exact recall. Your past is therefore a series of ongoing predictions. Each recollection is an attempt to make sense of incomplete information, using the present as the lens. The vividness of memory, the certainty you feel, is a byproduct of successful prediction, not verification. The consequence is profound. The past you carry is shaped more by the present than by what actually occurred. It is constructed for coherence, emotional comfort, and identity, constantly revised each time you revisit it. Memory is less about what was, and more about what your mind predicts must have been to make sense of now. You experience yesterday as though it were fixed, but in reality, it is a dynamic creation, a predictive model continuously updated to align with the needs, beliefs, and understanding of the current self. In essence, your memory is not a window to the past. It is a mirror reflecting your brain's best prediction of what fits into the story of who you are today. The past, then, is not a place you traveled. It is a forecast your mind generates after the fact, presented with the confidence and conviction of absolute truth. Memory is not a perfect recording device. It is a reconstruction system, a story builder, a narrative engine, and like any creative system, it can invent details, scenes, or even entire events that never happened. Yet when these fabricated memories arise, they feel as real as any moment you truly lived. There are many ways the brain can generate memories that never occurred. Sometimes, it's simple misattribution. You might confuse what you experienced with what you imagined, with what someone else told you, or with something you witnessed in a movie or photograph. Over time, the brain blends these sources, creating a memory that feels as authentic as your lived reality. Imagination and memory share neural pathways. When you vividly imagine an event, your brain activates many of the same regions it uses to recall real experiences. Later, it may confuse the imagined scene with an actual memory. A fantasy becomes a fact in the mind, a dinner that never happened, a conversation you never had, a success or failure that existed only in thought. Memory is also shaped by narrative coherence. Your mind constantly edits the past to fit your current self-image. If an event would make sense in your life story, it may appear as though it actually occurred. For example, you might remember standing up to someone, excelling in a challenge, or having a conversation that aligns perfectly with your identity, even if it never happened. The memory fills gaps in the narrative to make life feel orderly and meaningful. External suggestion amplifies this effect. Researchers have shown that simply asking someone about a fictitious event can implant a memory of it. People recall details, invent sensory impressions, even describe emotions from a scene they never experienced. The mind cannot always distinguish between genuine recollection and stories learned after the fact. Once the memory exists, it becomes integrated into the broader tapestry of personal history. Emotion intensifies false memory creation. Vivid feelings act as glue, making a memory more convincing. A fabricated event associated with strong emotion, fear, joy, shame, or nostalgia, feels more real than a mundane memory. Emotional weight gives the illusion of authenticity, and the brain reinforces it with repeated recall. Even repeated storytelling can solidify false memories. Each time you recount a memory, you reconstruct it, and small changes accumulate. A minor exaggeration, an imagined detail, or a misremembered line can become fixed over time. What was once imagination or misperception turns into an indelible recollection, indistinguishable from actual events. The implications are profound. You may feel certain about past experiences, confident that they happened exactly as you remember, but certainty is not evidence. Many of the memories you carry could be partly or entirely constructed. The events you think define your life may be mental artifacts, invented to maintain coherence, identity, and emotional stability. The brain does this not out of malice or flaw, it does it to function. False memories help you navigate the present. They smooth over gaps, fill in missing information, and maintain a sense of continuity in your personal story. They make life feel more predictable, understandable, and emotionally satisfying. In the end, you remember events that never occurred because your memory is not a mirror, it is a canvas. Each recollection is a painting, composed of fragments, colored by imagination, shaped by emotion, and refined by the needs of the present self. The past you carry is a work of art, not a historical record, and the mind paints freely, confident and convincingly, whether the scene ever truly existed or not. Your sense of a complete past is an illusion. You feel like your life has a continuous narrative, but most of your memories exist in fragments. The hours, days, and even years that you cannot recall are not lost because they never happened. They are lost because the brain did not encode them in a way that makes them accessible to consciousness. Neuroscience shows that memory is an active process, not a static archive. Sensory input travels through multiple brain regions, where it is filtered, encoded, and tagged for importance. Only a tiny fraction of every experience reaches long-term memory. The rest is discarded, never stored in detail. This means that the vast majority of your life exists as gaps, not solid records. When you remember, your brain does not simply retrieve stored footage. It reconstructs a scene using what is available: fragments, associations, and schemas. This reconstruction process is guided by context, current knowledge, and emotional state. Your brain also fills in missing information to create a coherent story. The gaps are invisible because the fill-ins are seamless. You never notice the scaffolding. You only see the completed memory. One of the most studied phenomena illustrating this is the role of the hippocampus. The hippocampus helps link disparate details into coherent episodes, but when information is missing, it works with the neocortex to generate plausible content. The brain predicts what likely happened based on patterns, prior experiences, and current beliefs. These predictions are inserted into the memory as if they were observed details. This explains why eyewitness accounts are so unreliable. Two people witnessing the same event can recall it differently, with each brain filling in gaps according to prior knowledge, expectations, and emotional biases. Even repeated recall changes the memory. Every reconstruction updates and slightly alters the stored version, making the brain's predictions increasingly entrenched. Memory gaps are not just about missing information, they also shape identity. The brain actively selects which details to retain and which to discard. Emotional salience, novelty, and social relevance influence what survives. Ordinary events, the breakfasts, walks, and conversations you forget, are erased or minimized because they are not critical to your ongoing narrative. The past that remains is sculpted for coherence, meaning, and personal relevance. The fill-ins can be astonishingly convincing. Your brain blends real fragments with inferred details, imagined possibilities, and information from external sources. Over time, the lines blur. You experience these hybrid memories as authentic. The memory feels complete, precise, and undeniable, yet it is a patchwork of reality and construction. Interestingly, the brain's predictive nature means that it often overestimates continuity. It assumes patterns and causality, smoothing rough edges to maintain a stable sense of self. This is why you believe in a continuous personal history, even though most of it is inaccessible. What you recall is not a literal snapshot but a carefully crafted reconstruction that fills in missing pieces automatically. Emotion, attention, and repetition amplify these effects. Events repeated in conversation or revisited through photographs become more detailed, more vivid, and more real in memory, even if certain details were fabricated. Emotional intensity acts as glue, binding the fragments and predictions into a single, confident narrative. Ultimately, neuroscience reveals that your past is both empty and full. Empty because most moments were never stored in retrievable detail. Full because your brain fills in the missing pieces so smoothly that you experience a seamless, continuous history. You carry a life story that appears whole, coherent, and fixed, but in truth, it is built in the present every time you recall it. Memory gaps and fill-ins are not flaws. They are the price of a system designed for efficiency, coherence, and survival. Your brain prioritizes meaning over perfect accuracy, pattern over completeness, and narrative over raw fact. The past you remember is less a record and more a reconstruction, a living model built on fragments, predictions, and emotional inference, stitched together to make you feel as though you have always lived a complete story. Your imagination feels distinct from memory, like a theater in your head where you can play out scenarios at will. You tell yourself, "I'm imagining this," and you experience the freedom of creation. Memory, by contrast, feels factual, anchored in the past. But the boundary between imagination and experience is surprisingly porous. The mind can, and often does, confuse one for the other. The brain uses overlapping neural circuits for both imagining and remembering. Visualizing a scene activates the same areas as recalling it. Imagining a conversation or a past event fires networks that process spatial layouts, emotions, and auditory details. Because the same machinery is involved, a vividly imagined scenario can later be encoded as if it were a real memory. Your mind stores the reconstruction and tags it with the feeling of authenticity, even though the event never actually occurred. This phenomenon is not rare or trivial. Psychologists call it source misattribution. The mind fails to identify the origin of a memory. You may vividly remember a childhood encounter, a heartfelt conversation, or a traumatic moment, only to realize later that it was imagined, inferred, or suggested by others. Yet the memory feels just as authentic as events you directly experienced. Imagination itself is active in shaping memory. When you recall events, you often unconsciously embellish them, fill in gaps, or simulate alternative outcomes. Over time, these imagined additions can merge with genuine fragments, producing memories that are hybrids of reality and invention. This is why, for instance, eyewitnesses can recall details that never occurred or create coherent stories from partial recollections. The mind seeks completeness and coherence, not strict fidelity. The emotional component intensifies the confusion. Imagination, infused with strong feelings, fear, joy, nostalgia, becomes particularly convincing. A vividly imagined scene with emotional weight can be recalled later, with the same intensity as an actual event. The brain interprets this emotional resonance as a marker of truth. In essence, feeling real becomes equivalent to being real. Even repeated mental rehearsal contributes to false memory formation. If you imagine an event multiple times, your brain strengthens the neural pathways associated with it, making the scenario easier to recall and more detailed. Each reconstruction reinforces the illusion of authenticity. Over time, imagination and memory intertwine so completely that distinguishing between them becomes nearly impossible. Social influence further blurs the line. Stories told by others, photos, or prompts can seed imaginative reconstructions that later feel like personal experience. Your mind incorporates these external elements, integrating them seamlessly with fragments of real memories. The resulting recollection feels internally generated, yet it is a co-creation of memory, imagination, and suggestion. This blending has profound implications for identity. Your sense of personal history, choices, and character may include episodes that never occurred. The you who experienced them is partially a fiction created by your own mind. Yet these constructed memories can shape beliefs, behaviors, and emotional responses just as strongly as real experiences. The critical takeaway is that memory is not a neutral archive. It is dynamic, creative, and reconstructive. Imagination seeps into memory, emotions solidify it, and repeated recall reinforces it. What you feel as certainty about the past may include events that were never lived at all. In the end, the past you carry in your mind is not a pure record of experience. It is a living tapestry, woven from fragments of reality, threads of imagination, and the colors of emotion. The mind confuses the imagined with the experience so seamlessly that you inhabit a version of history that feels authentic, coherent, and immutable, yet is always partly invented in the present moment. You live your life thinking in terms of past, present, and future, as if these are three clearly defined regions of reality. You place events into yesterday, moments into today, and plans into tomorrow. But the brain, the body, and physics all suggest a strikingly different truth. The only place anything truly occurs is the present moment. Every sensation you experience, the light entering your eyes, the texture beneath your fingers, the vibration of a sound, is processed in the brain before you consciously perceive it. By the time you feel an event, it has already unfolded. Your awareness is always trailing behind raw occurrence, stitching together fragments to produce the seamless impression of now. Even decisions, intentions, and actions are initiated unconsciously milliseconds before you feel you consciously choose them. The present you inhabit is a reconstruction of what has just happened, not a direct slice of reality. The past you remember is not happening. It exists only as a mental model. Even vivid, emotionally charged recollections are simulations created in the present. The future you anticipate is a prediction, a rehearsal of possible outcomes generated in your mind. Neither truly exists outside of your awareness. Memory and imagination operate entirely in the present, projected backward or forward, as if they were tangible locations in time. This reframes the act of living. You are never in the past, despite your vivid memories. You are never in the future, despite your plans and anticipations. Every thought, every sensation, every decision occurs in the now. Your entire life, moment by moment, is a continuous flow of present awareness, constantly reconstructing and predicting. Even the idea of a continuous self across time exists only because your brain stitches together experiences into a narrative. Identity is a construct of memory and projection, and it exists solely as a pattern in present consciousness. Without your active awareness, the past and future are empty abstractions. Physics also supports this perspective. Time, as experienced psychologically, is not a simple linear river. Relativity shows that temporal order can vary between observers. Neuroscience demonstrates that neural processing introduces unavoidable delays between event and perception. Both point to the conclusion that what you call now is the only moment where events actually intersect with consciousness. Recognizing this forces a radical reconsideration of what is real. The vivid memories, regrets, and anticipations that dominate your thoughts occupy no physical space outside your brain. They are reconstructions in the present, dynamically recreated every time you engage with them. Even the past you hold as fact is a living simulation, updated and edited each moment. Understanding that only the present truly exists dissolves much of the illusion of continuity. The you who experienced yesterday is gone. The you who anticipates tomorrow has not yet arrived. Consciousness is a moment-to-moment process, and all experience is happening here and now, whether you notice it or not. In practice, this is liberating and disorienting. It means the world is always immediate, always accessible, always unfolding in your awareness. Simultaneously, it means that the solidity of the past, the inevitability of the future, and even the permanence of yourself are all products of a present mind weaving together fragments and predictions. You inhabit only the present. Every thought of yesterday or tomorrow is generated here, in this single moment, and the reality of all events exists exclusively in this ever-moving now. Past and future are tools of comprehension, not places where life actually occurs. In essence, the present is the only stage, and everything else is shadow and projection. You think of yourself as a continuous being, the same you who laughed as a child, stumbled in adolescence, and now makes decisions as an adult. This sense of continuity is comforting. It gives you a story of growth, cause, and consequence, but the timeline you rely on, yesterday, last year, a decade ago, is largely a fiction, a scaffolding your brain constructs to support identity. Your sense of self depends on narrative more than fact. The brain links disparate memories, highlights certain events, and omits others to produce coherence. It assigns roles, child, student, friend, professional, and ties experiences to these roles. Over time, this weaving creates the impression of a single, continuous identity that persists through time. Yet this continuity exists only in your present mind. The past is reconstructed, the future is imagined. Your identity is not anchored in literal events, but in the story your brain tells about them. Memory plays a crucial role in this fiction. Each recollection reinforces patterns of behavior and self-perception. You remember times you were brave or kind and forget, minimize or reinterpret moments that conflict with your current identity. Over years, these selective reconstructions solidify the traits you believe define you, yet those traits are not immutable facts. They are narrative products shaped by current beliefs, values, and emotional needs. Imagination further reinforces the timeline. When you predict future actions or reflect on hypothetical choices, your brain simulates events in a way that integrates seamlessly with past memories. The mind creates a temporal chain connecting past, present, and future, even if the events themselves are reconstructed, exaggerated, or partly imagined. The timeline feels real because your brain constructs causal and emotional links that hold the story together. Even personal milestones are subject to reinterpretation. Graduations, birthdays, successes, failures, all are remembered through the lens of current identity. You may recall a childhood achievement as evidence of early ambition, or a mistake as a learning moment, even if at the time it had little significance. The brain reshapes memory to fit the story it wants to tell about who you are. This means that the timeline supporting your identity is a living fiction. It is useful, it provides coherence, meaning, and emotional stability, but it is not a literal record of events. Each recollection, each reinterpretation, updates the narrative, ensuring that your identity remains intelligible and consistent, even if the underlying memories are partial, distorted, or imagined. The consequences are profound. Your self-concept is not a reflection of immutable truth. It is a product of a constructed timeline. You believe in personal continuity, but continuity is created, maintained, and constantly revised by the brain. The you that existed 10 years ago is a mental reconstruction you maintain now. The you who will exist 10 years from now is already being simulated in your predictions. Both rely on narrative scaffolding more than on objective events. Even choices feel like extensions of past patterns, as if you are acting in accordance with a historical trajectory. Yet the perceived trajectory is often retroactively constructed. Your present mind interprets past events in ways that justify current behavior, lending the illusion of inevitability and coherence. Identity is therefore backward-looking, as much as it is forward-moving. It is stitched together to make sense of itself in the present. Ultimately, identity depends on the brain's ability to fabricate a consistent timeline out of incomplete, fragmented, and malleable material. Your life story is less a record of actual events than a narrative constructed to hold a self together across time. The continuity you trust, the person you believe yourself to be, exists not in past or future, but in the present mind, orchestrating the timeline. You are, in essence, a character in a story your brain writes about yourself, a story anchored in the present and projected backward and forward. Your history and identity are inseparable from this fictional timeline, giving coherence to a self that exists only as a living, evolving construct in the now. You assume that your brain records events with perfect chronological accuracy. Yesterday happened before today, last year before now. You trust the timestamps in your mind, as though they were labels on files in a digital archive. Yet neuroscience shows that this timekeeping is far from precise. The brain's system for ordering memories is ingenious but inherently flawed, which means your sense of when things happened, and even whether they happened in the order you remember, is often unreliable. The brain does not have a clock that automatically tags every moment. Instead, it relies on networks in the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, and other regions to encode sequences by associations, context, and relative cues. Events are time-stamped by linking them to surrounding details, location, people, emotions, or what else was happening. This system works remarkably well in ordinary life, but is highly dependent on inference. When cues are missing, your brain fills in gaps, often incorrectly. Memory is also reconstructive. Each time you recall an event, your mind doesn't retrieve a fixed chronological label. It rebuilds the scene using fragments and places it in sequence relative to other memories. Over repeated recalls, these sequences can drift. An event you think happened before a friend's visit may actually have occurred afterward, or the order may be entirely imagined. The mind prioritizes coherence over factual order. Even small delays between perception and awareness affect how events are time-stamped. Your brain processes sights, sounds, and sensations in slightly different temporal windows, then stitches them together into a single perceived now. This process introduces micro-errors that compound when sequences are reconstructed later. Memories are not only malleable, they are subject to temporal distortion from the moment of encoding itself. The hippocampus also organizes memories by contextual similarity, rather than strict temporal order. Events that feel connected, or similar, are often grouped together, regardless of when they occurred. This explains why memories from a particular vacation, school year, or job often seem to blend into one seamless timeline. Temporal proximity in memory is influenced more by narrative and emotional association than actual clock time. External factors, such as suggestion, discussion, or media, can exacerbate these flaws. Hearing someone else's story can subtly shift when you think your own events occurred. Looking at photographs or reading journals can reorder perceived sequences. Even deliberate attempts to remember can unintentionally reassign timestamps, as your brain constructs plausible sequences to maintain a coherent story. Emotion plays a role as well. Highly emotional events are often remembered more vividly and feel more temporally distinct, but the actual ordering can be distorted. You may recall a dramatic fight as preceding a happy celebration, when in fact it occurred afterward. The intensity of the emotional imprint gives it prominence in memory, but not accuracy in sequence. The consequences are profound. You rely on memory to navigate life, make decisions, and construct identity. If the temporal order of experiences is fluid and malleable, your understanding of cause and effect, growth, and personal history is built on an inherently unstable foundation. Your timeline is a model created in the present to make sense of fragments, not a faithful recording of real-world chronology. Even mundane events are subject to drift. Breakfasts, commutes, and conversations can shift forward or backward in perceived order, subtly altering how your brain interprets patterns and causality. You live in a constructed temporal framework, updated every time a memory is recalled or imagined. Ultimately, the brain's time-stamping system is less like a precise clock and more like a creative editor. It organizes fragments into a plausible sequence, smoothing inconsistencies, filling gaps, and emphasizing significance. The timeline you trust is a narrative convenience, useful for coherence and survival, but always imperfect, always reconstructed, and always subject to the distortions of perception, emotion, and imagination. The past, therefore, is never fixed. Even your certainties about when things happened are provisional constructions maintained by the present mind to give the illusion of a continuous linear history. Time in memory is a story told in the now, not a record of moments that objectively existed in the order you believe. When you think back to childhood, it often feels hazy, surreal, and oddly cinematic, as if you are remembering someone else's life rather than your own. The sights, sounds, and sensations are vivid yet strangely distant, like a dream you somehow absorbed rather than lived. This sensation is not mere nostalgia. It reflects the brain's way of reconstructing early life from fragmentary memories, indirect sources, and narrative stitching. Few of your early experiences were encoded with precision. Infants and young children process the world differently. Neural circuits for long-term autobiographical memory are immature, language is limited, and attention is fragmented. Most childhood events are stored not as coherent, self-aware episodes, but as isolated sensory impressions, colors, sounds, textures, emotions. Later, your brain reconstructs these impressions into memories when you recall them, often supplementing gaps with imagination, stories from others, photographs, or cultural narratives. This is why childhood feels dreamlike. The details are never fully yours in the way adult memories are. The memory of a birthday party might include a sense of joy, laughter, or chaos, but many elements who said what exactly happened are inferred or borrowed from external sources. You inherit a version of the past, a mental collage pieced together over years. Your recollection is not an exact recording. It is a construction that feels complete only because the brain fills in the blanks. Language plays a crucial role. Much of early experience is encoded non-verbally. When you later attempt to recall those moments, the mind translates sensations into words, narratives, and concepts that did not exist at the time. This translation introduces interpretation, structure, and sometimes fiction. The child you that you remember is partly a narrative invention, shaped to make sense of fragments decades later. Family stories and social reinforcement amplify this effect. Tales told by parents, photographs, and home videos provide a scaffold for memory. Your mind integrates these external cues seamlessly into your autobiographical narrative, creating the sense that you directly experienced moments that were mediated through others. The dreamlike quality of childhood arises because you are remembering a blend of personal fragments and inherited reconstructions. Emotion exaggerates the effect. Strong feelings, fear, excitement, awe, anchor certain experiences in memory, while ordinary days fade. The brain prioritizes vivid emotional imprints over mundane details. When recalling childhood, the moments you remember most vividly often feel more like myth than reality. The frightening shadow under the bed, the exhilaration of a first bike ride, the warmth of a family gathering. These emotionally charged recollections carry weight, but the narrative around them is largely created in retrospect. Even the perception of continuity is constructed. You believe your childhood flows logically into adolescence and adulthood, yet those early years were often disconnected and chaotic. The narrative of a smooth personal development is imposed later, with memory weaving gaps into coherent episodes. The child you is a character in a story your adult mind has written, borrowing sensory fragments but interpreting them according to present identity and understanding. Sleep, dreaming, and imagination also influence the process. Many early experiences are recalled as if filtered through dreamlike perception. The vividness, distortions, and surreal quality of memories mirror the way the brain processes and integrates information during sleep. Dreams leave traces in memory, and over time these traces blend with actual events, further enhancing the dreamlike quality of childhood recollection. Ultimately, childhood feels like a dream you inherited, because it is. The memories are partially yours, partially reconstructed, partially suggested by others, and partially invented by the brain to create a coherent personal history. You remember a version of the past that is emotionally resonant, narratively complete, and deeply tied to identity, but it is always a reconstruction, a mental inheritance shaped by the present mind. Your early life exists less as lived experience, and more as a crafted tapestry of fragments, emotion, and story. You inhabit it now as an observer, looking back at a self that once was, reconstructed in the present, dreamlike and endlessly malleable. Childhood is a narrative artifact, a memory you carry rather than a reality you fully recall. You might assume that memory exists to preserve the past, to give you an accurate record of what happened so you can navigate life with knowledge and certainty. But evolution designed the brain for survival, not truth. Memory is not a documentary archive, it is a predictive adaptive system, engineered to help you live, avoid danger, and make decisions, not to perfectly record reality. From an evolutionary standpoint, the brain's priority is utility. Remembering exact details of every event would be costly and inefficient. Instead, the brain stores fragments, patterns, and emotional cues that are most useful for navigating the world. This explains why memory often exaggerates threats, prioritizes emotionally salient events, and generalizes patterns rather than preserving strict factual accuracy. Survival depends more on the lesson extracted than on the literal occurrence. Memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. When recalling an event, the brain assembles pieces in ways that serve present needs. A past failure may be remembered as a lesson to avoid future mistakes. A social interaction may be edited to reinforce alliances or avoid conflict. Accuracy is secondary. Coherence, relevance, and actionable insight matter more than factual precision. Your brain is a survival engine disguised as a historical archive. Even false memories can be adaptive. Remembering something that never happened but could plausibly occur can help anticipate danger, avoid mistakes, or rehearse social interactions. Imagination and reconstruction are not flaws. They are extensions of the same system that allows humans to plan, predict, and strategize. Your memory is designed to be flexible, to generate scenarios and patterns that enhance your ability to survive and thrive. Emotion amplifies this adaptive function. Events tied to strong feelings are encoded more vividly because they are often more relevant to survival. Fearful encounters are stored with enhanced intensity to prevent repetition of danger. Joyful or bonding experiences are preserved to maintain relationships and social cohesion. Memory prioritizes emotional utility over factual precision, reinforcing the patterns that matter most to your well-being. Pattern recognition is central to memory's survival function. The brain emphasizes cause and effect, linking events in ways that create actionable rules. You may remember touching a hot stove causes pain, far more vividly than the stove was blue and shiny, because the rule helps you survive. Memory constructs narratives that allow you to generalize lessons from limited data, even if the specific events are misremembered or partially fabricated. The reconstructive nature of memory explains why your personal history is malleable. The brain fills gaps, edits inconsistencies, and even invents details to maintain coherence. This is not about deception, it is about efficiency. A coherent story of the past, even if partially fictional, allows you to make better predictions, reinforce identity, and navigate social networks effectively. Survival depends on functionality, not truth. Even collective memory functions this way. Shared stories, cultural myths, and social histories are remembered and transmitted, not because they are perfectly factual, but because they reinforce cooperation, social learning, and adaptive behavior. Memory, at the individual and group level, is a tool for creating models that work in the present rather than perfect chronicles of the past. Ultimately, the past you remember is a means to an end. Memory exists to guide behavior, inform decisions, and preserve lessons, not to document reality. Accuracy is secondary, utility is primary. The events you recall, the details you remember, and the sequence you perceive all serve the needs of a present-focused mind operating in an uncertain world. The unsettling but liberating conclusion is that your memories are not truth machines, they are survival machines. The past is not fixed, and what you remember is not guaranteed to be factual. Yet the system works astonishingly well. It gives you the illusion of continuity, the sense of personal history, and the confidence to act in the world, all while reshaping and reconstructing the past as necessary to keep you alive and functional. Your memories, therefore, are living tools, adaptive, flexible, and exquisitely tuned to survival, rather than perfect reflections of what really happened. The past you carry is less a record, and more a guide, continually rewritten in service of the present. Experience is continuous, flowing like a river. Sight, sound, touch, emotion, and thought all arrive in an unbroken stream. Yet, when you recall the past, you perceive it as discrete events. The birthday party, the argument, the first day at school. This transformation from fluid experience to bounded memory is largely due to language, which shapes how the brain encodes, organizes, and remembers life. Language imposes structure on perception. To communicate, the mind slices continuous experience into manageable units that can be described, narrated, and transmitted. A single day is divided into episodes, each with a beginning, middle, and end. These units are labeled with words, sentences, and stories, giving them a sense of solidity. When you recall them later, you retrieve these linguistic markers rather than the raw flow of sensation. The act of verbalizing experience alters memory itself. When you describe an event to yourself or others, your brain selects details that can be put into words, omits what is ineffable, and organizes fragments into causal sequences. Over time, these verbalized versions overwrite the original, unstructured impressions. The fluidity of perception is lost, replaced by narratives your brain can encode and repeat. Even internal thought acts like language. Silent reflection often frames moments as events, categorizes experiences, and assigns meaning. By labeling and narrating internally, the mind converts perception into a personal history that feels coherent and continuous. Yet this coherence comes at the cost of fidelity. The events you remember are constructions shaped by the grammar and logic of language. Emotion interacts with language to reinforce this effect. Emotional peaks are often assigned words, fear, joy, pride, shame, that act as anchors in memory. The linguistic labels create markers, emphasizing some moments and ignoring others. Over time, the labeled, linguistically framed episodes dominate your recollection, giving the impression of a past composed of discrete, meaningful events, rather than continuous sensation. This process also explains why two people can recall the same moment differently. Each person's language, vocabulary, and internal narrative style shape how experience is segmented. A conversation between friends can be remembered in conflicting ways, not because reality changed, but because the mind organizes and describes fluid perception uniquely for each observer. Language also introduces causality into memory. By framing sequences in sentences, the brain naturally imposes order. Cause precedes effect. Actions lead to outcomes, and intentions explain behavior. Events are given a logical structure that may not have existed in real-time perception. The past appears orderly, but it is a linguistic artifact, reconstructed to satisfy the brain's preference for coherent narratives. Even when you do not speak or write, language subtly governs memory. Internal naming, categorization, and labeling are constant, shaping how fragments of experience are stored and recalled. Your brain's ability to encode abstract concepts, organize scenes, and construct sequences relies on the scaffolding of language, consciously or unconsciously. The implication is profound. The events of your life are not raw occurrences, but linguistically framed reconstructions. Memory is sculpted by words, grammar, and narrative conventions, freezing what was continuous and multifaceted into manageable, repeatable units. Your personal history is essentially a story told in language, with all the coherence, gaps, and distortions that storytelling entails. In short, language allows experience to be stored, communicated, and shared, but it also converts the fluidity of reality into the solid, bounded events you carry in your mind. The past exists not as continuous sensation, but as a series of linguistically defined snapshots, structured and frozen in a way that makes life intelligible, narratable, and emotionally coherent. The river of life becomes a chain of remembered stones, each labeled, framed, and preserved in the present. You think of yourself as the protagonist of a continuous story, moving forward through time. You remember yesterday, anticipate tomorrow, and feel a coherent eye, threading these moments together. But closer examination suggests a strange inversion. The self you experience now is a character written backward, constructed by the present mind to make sense of fragments that have already occurred. In other words, identity is authored in reverse. Your brain takes scattered memories, fragmented sensations, fleeting emotions, partial experiences, and assembles them into a narrative that makes the current self coherent. The you who acted, felt, or observed in the past is reconstructed from the vantage point of now. Memory is always interpreted through the present lens, and this interpretation reshapes the past to align with the identity you inhabit today. The self, therefore, is a narrative artifact, created after the fact rather than discovered in real time. This backward construction explains why memory is so malleable. You recall past events not as they were, but as they would make sense given who you are today. Achievements are amplified, failures are softened, and emotional interpretations are revised. The you who lived those moments may have been different, inconsistent, or chaotic, but the story your mind tells transforms that version into a coherent, intelligible character that matches your current self-image. Language and narrative structure facilitate this retroactive authorship. By framing memories in words, connecting cause and effect, and imposing temporal order, the mind shapes past events into episodes that make sense from the present perspective. Each reconstructed memory reinforces the character of you, highlighting traits, patterns, and values that support a unified identity. Over time, these retroactive edits solidify, giving the illusion of an unbroken self-consistent history. Emotion plays a central role. Emotional responses to past events are filtered through the present self. You may recall fear as caution, embarrassment as a learning moment, or sadness as nostalgia. These reinterpretations reinforce the narrative coherence of the self, ensuring that the character aligns with current beliefs, desires, and self-perception. The self you recall is always a present invention, written backward to make sense of lived or reconstructed experience. Even habitual behaviors are incorporated into this backward narrative. Your patterns, tendencies, and choices are retrospectively framed as part of a logical storyline. The brain creates cause and effect links that may never have existed objectively, but are imposed to support continuity. The self becomes a carefully crafted protagonist in a story authored by your present mind, capable of retrospectively integrating disparate episodes into a coherent biography. This concept challenges the notion of a stable, continuous self. You are not the same you who existed yesterday. That version exists only as a reconstruction. Each memory of the past is filtered, edited, and interpreted to reinforce the identity you experience now. The self is less a pre-existing entity traveling through time, and more a character continuously written backward, emerging in the present through retroactive narrative construction. The implications extend to behavior and perception. Because the self is a present creation, your understanding of past motives, choices, and experiences is inherently biased. You interpret history in ways that justify current beliefs, reinforce self-esteem, and maintain narrative consistency. Memory and identity are therefore co-authored, inseparable, and perpetually evolving in the now. In essence, the I you inhabit is a narrative artic, a character the mind has authored by looking backward across memory fragments. Past experiences, emotions, and actions are not neutral facts but building blocks selectively chosen and reshaped to craft a coherent protagonist. The self exists as a story told in the present, with the past rewritten to serve the needs of the character now standing center stage. You do not remember the self. You write it. Every recollection, reflection, and reinterpretation retroactively constructs the character that carries your identity forward. The past, therefore, is a script. The present is the author, and the self is the protagonist of a story perpetually rewritten backward, moment by moment. Humans crave continuity. We construct stories of who we are, where we came from, and how we arrived at the present moment. This sense of a stable past is not a luxury, it is a psychological necessity. Even though the brain reconstructs memories, edits details, and fills gaps, the mind clings to the idea that the past is fixed, coherent, and knowable. Without it, the sense of self would unravel. Your mind uses the past to anchor identity. Memories provide reference points for behavior, beliefs, and emotions. By recalling previous successes, failures, and experiences, you create a framework for understanding yourself and your place in the world. Stability in the past gives rise to stability in the present. It allows you to predict your responses, justify choices, and maintain a continuous narrative. Without a coherent past, every decision would feel untethered, every emotion disconnected. Memory's reconstructive nature challenges this stability. As you recall events, your brain edits, fills in missing pieces, and smooths contradictions. Each retrieval alters the memory, and yet the mind perceives it as unchanged. The psychological need for a stable past pressures your brain to maintain consistency, even at the cost of accuracy. Errors, exaggerations, and omissions are tolerated, because the system prioritizes continuity over truth. Emotion amplifies the need for stability. Traumatic or highly charged events are often reinterpreted, reframed, or selectively remembered to reduce cognitive dissonance. You may emphasize resilience, courage, or growth, while minimizing shame, failure, or confusion. The past is not erased, it is edited to protect mental equilibrium, reinforcing the narrative of a coherent self. Language and culture reinforce the illusion. Talking about the past, recounting stories and organizing memories into events, creates a shared and personal sense of temporal order. Social validation, others agreeing with your version of events, further stabilizes your perceived history. You may feel certain that this happened then, not because it is objectively true, but because repeated discussion and narrative frameworks have solidified the memory. Even false memories serve this need. Experiments show that people confidently recall events that never occurred, often merging imagination, suggestion, or external input with fragments of real experience. The brain does not view these inaccuracies as harmful. It views them as necessary scaffolding for the self. A coherent story is psychologically preferable to a fragmented or contradictory one. This need explains why nostalgia and reminiscence are so powerful. Revisiting the past, even partially reconstructed, partially fictional, provides comfort, meaning, and identity reinforcement. The stable past offers a stage for reflection, allowing you to evaluate growth, anticipate future behavior, and affirm personal values. Even the gaps and inconsistencies are tolerated or glossed over because the overarching narrative matters more than minute detail. Your sense of agency also depends on a stable past. Believing that you made certain choices, learned lessons, and developed traits allows you to act decisively in the present. The past becomes a reference for cause and effect, shaping expectations and guiding behavior. Without it, your decisions would feel arbitrary, and your understanding of responsibility, morality, and consequence would weaken. Ultimately, the psychological need for a stable past is a survival mechanism for the mind. Coherence, predictability, and continuity are prioritized over factual precision. Memory is flexible, selective, and reconstructive, but it is molded by the demand for stability. The past you carry is not fixed, it is curated, edited, and interpreted to maintain a sense of order in identity and life narrative. The past you rely on feels solid, yet it exists in service of the present. Its stability is less about historical accuracy, and more about psychological function. It allows you to inhabit a continuous self, navigate life confidently, and make sense of the endless flow of experience. Without this constructed stability, the mind would struggle to reconcile who you were, who you are, and who you hope to become. You tend to think of the past as fixed events occurred, moments unfolded, and experiences were immutable. But memory is not a ledger of facts. It is a living narrative, continually edited and revised by the mind. When the story you tell yourself about who you are changes, the events you believe happened also shift. The past is not a static backdrop, it is a reflection of the identity you construct in the present. Every time you reinterpret your values, beliefs, or sense of self, your memories are filtered through this new lens. A childhood embarrassment may transform from a source of shame into a lesson in resilience. A past failure may become evidence of growth. Even details you once recalled confidently, words spoken, actions taken, outcomes experienced, can be unconsciously altered to fit the updated narrative of who you are now. Memory serves the present self, not objective truth. Psychologists call this process reconsolidation. Every act of remembering is an act of rewriting. The neural circuits that encode memory are malleable. Recalling a scene or event opens it to modification. Emotions, context, and identity all influence the reconstruction. When your self-perception changes, the brain reshapes past experiences to align with that new self-image, creating the illusion that what happened has always been consistent with who you are today. Narrative coherence drives this phenomenon. Your mind dislikes contradiction. If an event in the past conflicts with the story you now tell about yourself, the memory is altered, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically, to restore harmony. This explains why people who undergo major personal transformations often describe past events differently than they once did. The past is flexible because the self is flexible. Emotion intensifies the effect. Strong feelings associated with memory are not immutable. They are interpreted through the current emotional and psychological state. Fear can become caution. Embarrassment can become humor. Pride can be inserted where there was none. The emotional resonance of a memory is recalibrated to match the identity you now inhabit, further modifying how you perceive what actually happened. Even collective memory works this way. Family narratives, social stories, and cultural accounts are reconstructed to maintain consistency with the current group identity. Discrepancies are glossed over or reinterpreted to sustain coherence. Your individual identity operates on the same principle. The mind adjusts facts, sequences, and emotional interpretations to support a cohesive self-story. This flexibility explains why people can confidently remember events differently across time. Two siblings recalling the same childhood scene may produce entirely divergent accounts, shaped by the evolving narratives of their identities. Over time, your own memories may contradict each other, yet each version feels authentic because it aligns with who you believe yourself to be at that moment. The consequences are profound. If what happened depends on who you are now, then memory cannot be trusted as a historical record. The past is a mirror of the present self, not a repository of objective events. Every recollection is a reflection of identity, continuously sculpted by reinterpretation, re-evaluation, and the unconscious need for coherence. In essence, the story of you is inseparable from the story of your past. When your self-image evolves, through growth, trauma, insight, or reflection, the events you remember evolve too. Memory is less a record of immutable facts, and more a tool for maintaining identity. The past is written in the ink of the present, and every time your story shifts, so too does the version of what happened you carry within you. Your history is not fixed. It is authored by the self in the now. Each moment of reflection reshapes the narrative, folding past events into the contours of the current identity. In this way, the story of you is both the author and the editor, and what happened exists only as it is remembered through the ever-changing lens of who you are today. You assume that the past is static, locked in time, and unchangeable. You picture yesterday as a completed chapter, a finished sequence of events that exists independently of your mind. But neuroscience suggests a far stranger reality. Every time you recall the past, you may be subtly, or even dramatically updating it. Memory is not a playback system, it is a reconstruction. Each act of remembering opens the past to modification, interpretation, and integration with the present self. The brain's process of reconsolidation makes this possible. When you recall an event, the neural circuits involved are temporarily malleable. During this period, new information, current emotions, and present beliefs can infiltrate the memory. Once reconsolidated, the memory may contain these updates, effectively rewriting the past. In this sense, every recollection is an act of editing history rather than retrieving a fixed record. This updating is often unconscious. You are rarely aware that your memories are being modified. They feel stable, coherent, and accurate, yet the brain prioritizes coherence and meaning over fidelity. If a remembered event conflicts with current self-conception, social context, or emotional needs, your mind naturally alters details, sequences, or interpretations to preserve internal consistency. The past becomes a reflection of your present identity. Emotion intensifies this effect. Vivid feelings tied to memory, fear, joy, shame, pride, act as anchors, but their interpretation can shift. A frightening childhood memory may later feel empowering. A painful loss may be reframed as a lesson. Each time you revisit the memory, the emotional tone can be adjusted, altering the subjective experience of what actually happened. Over time, these modifications accumulate, so the past you recall decades later can be radically different from your initial recollection. Even trivial acts of thinking can update the past. Simply visualizing an event, imagining alternative outcomes, or rehearsing scenarios in your mind can subtly alter memory traces. The more you reflect, the more plastic the past becomes. Your mind treats memory like a living document, revisited, annotated, and amended according to present context and meaning. Language and narrative play critical roles. Each time you tell the story of your past, whether to yourself or others, you select, omit, and emphasize details. These linguistic reconstructions do not merely describe memory, they reshape it. Over repeated retellings, your past is effectively rewritten to align with the story you currently inhabit. Social interaction amplifies this process. Conversations, shared recollections, and cultural narratives provide cues that your brain integrates into memory. Facts may shift, timelines adjust, and interpretations transform, all unconsciously. You come to believe in a version of events that aligns with consensus, coherence, or current identity, even if the original experience was different. This fluidity destabilizes the notion of a fixed past. Every act of remembering becomes a creative act, a rewriting of history. The events you recall are not immutable. They are living constructs, shaped continuously by present perception, emotion, and identity. Memory is less a record and more a reflection, a dynamic interface between what was, what is, and who you are now. The philosophical implications are staggering. If the past updates with each recollection, then reality itself is partly reconstructed in the present. You are never truly accessing what happened. You are engaging with a version of it filtered through your current mind. The past exists only as it is remembered and continually reshaped. Ultimately, every time you think of yesterday, you are rewriting it. The past is not a static archive. It is a fluid narrative, living in the present, constantly updated to maintain coherence, meaning, and identity. Each memory is an act of creation, making the you who remembers both the author and editor of history itself. The past is never final. It exists only as it is reimagined in the mind of now. If the past is not a fixed landscape but a reconstruction, if memory is a story told in the present rather than a record of what truly happened, then a strange question emerges: what are you right now in this moment? Without a solid past beneath you, what is this sense of being a person with history, identity, and continuity? Strip away memory as a reliable archive, and what remains is immediate experience. Sensations arise: light, sound, bodily feelings, thoughts appear unannounced, emotions shift like weather. All of this happens now, without needing a past to exist. The feeling of being you is not built from ancient events unfolding again. It is generated in real time, assembled from perception, thought, and awareness in the present. Your identity feels old, layered, and continuous, but that continuity is a present construction. The mind assembles fragments, images labeled childhood, impressions labeled last year, expectations labeled tomorrow, and weaves them into a sense of enduring self. But this weaving happens now. The you who supposedly stretches backward through time is an idea appearing in present consciousness, just like any other thought. This does not make you unreal. It makes you immediate. You are not a historical object traveling through time. You are a process occurring in the present. Your body regulates itself. Your brain generates perceptions and interpretations, and awareness illuminates the whole system. This dynamic activity is what you actually are, not a static entity anchored in a perfectly preserved past. The feeling of continuity arises because the brain maintains patterns, habits, personality traits, and preferences, create stability across moments. When these patterns are active, they produce the impression of a persistent self. But the patterns exist only as ongoing activity. They are not stored somewhere as a solid me that moves intact from yesterday to today. They are recreated, moment by moment, like a flame that appears constant while the fuel and air continuously change. Without a fixed past, you are not a character with a completed backstory. You are more like a narrative being written live, each moment adding texture to the present sense of self. Memories still arise, but they function as present thoughts influencing current perception and behavior. They do not prove the existence of a solid, unchanging identity stretching backward through time. This perspective can feel unsettling. The mind prefers stability, roots, a sense of origin, yet it can also be freeing. If you are not bound by a perfectly preserved past, then identity is flexible, patterns can shift, interpretations can change. You are less a prisoner of what happened, and more a living system responding now. The weight of history lightens when you see it as an active construction rather than an unalterable foundation. Right now, you are awareness experiencing sensations, thoughts, and emotions. You are a biological organism, regulating itself in an environment. You are patterns of neural activity, producing a sense of self. None of this requires a perfectly accurate past, only ongoing processes unfolding in the present moment. The you that feels ancient and continuous is a present experience, built from memory fragments, expectations, and interpretations. If the past was never fully real in the way you imagined, then what you are right now is not a story traveling through time, but a living event happening here. You are not your past. You are the present activity of remembering, perceiving, and being. Identity is not a trail behind you. It is a flame burning now, fed by memory, imagination, and sensation, but existing only in this moment. As we reach the end of this exploration, one truth becomes unavoidable. The past you believe in is largely a construct, a story your brain tells in the present. Memory is not a faithful archive. It is reconstructive, selective, and malleable. Your sense of continuity, identity, and personal history depends on narrative coherence more than on factual accuracy. Events are remembered, edited, and interpreted to serve the self you inhabit now. In this light, the past is not a fixed reality. It is a living, evolving reflection of the present mind. Every memory you summon updates itself with each recall. Emotions, language, imagination, and shifting self-perception shape what you believe happened. Childhood becomes a dreamlike inheritance. Personal failures are softened or reinterpreted, and even factual sequences are rearranged to support the narrative of a coherent identity. What you feel as history is less a record of what occurred than a tool your brain uses to survive, understand, and navigate the present. This realization reframes everything about who you are. Identity, personality, and the sense of self are not anchored in immutable events. They emerge in real time, moment by moment. The you that remembers, plans, fears, or hopes is a process actively unfolding now, drawing on reconstructed fragments labeled as past to maintain stability and coherence. Continuity exists not because the past is real, but because the present mind constructs it as if it were. The implications are both unsettling and liberating. If the past is fluid, you are no longer confined by mistakes, regrets, or limitations that seem permanent. You are free to reshape narratives, reinterpret experiences, and approach life with an understanding that identity is flexible and ever-evolving. The present, not the past, is the only reality you can truly inhabit, and in this present, you are active, aware, and alive. Ultimately, what remains when you strip away the illusion of a fixed past is strikingly simple. You exist as consciousness, perception, and action in the now. The stories, memories, and events you carry are instruments of survival and identity, not immutable facts. Your past is never fully real, and yet it shapes nothing outside the present moment in which you live. Awareness itself, immediate and unrepeatable, is all that is necessary. So, if the past was never real, then the you who clings to it is only ever a reflection in the present moment. What exists is not a person moving through time, but a living process of thought, feeling, and perception, constantly constructing meaning and identity in the now. You are not who you were, not who you will be, but what you are right now, an event of consciousness unfolding, ephemeral, dynamic, and entirely real in the present. The past is an illusion. The present is your reality. Everything else is a story your mind tells to make sense of it.